If you use large apertures for all of your portraits, you're severely limiting your creative possibilities. Even though you've been told by 99% of YouTube photographers to use 2.8 or 1.8 to blur your background and your foreground, I think that's wrong. Now, there are very few absolutes in photography. We all have a brain and we all have personal preferences, but please don't just follow the sheep. Don't follow me. Make your own decisions based on the story that you want to tell with your image. Our cameras have a range of apertures and a range of shutter speeds. Use them for your creative purposes. Occasionally, large apertures which create a shallow depth of field are useful in an image, and I do use them sometimes. But most of my images are taken between f8 and f16, sometimes f22. Shock horror. Shooting every image the same with a large aperture and a shallow depth of field just creates the same image over and over again, just with a different face. I don't want to make this video too technical, but we do need to touch on a few things to explain what I'm talking about. Depth of field can be thought of as depth of focus. It's the amount of your image from front to back that is in acceptably sharp focus. We can shoot images with a narrow depth of field, so our foreground is out of focus and our background is out of focus, but our subject is sharp. Or we can shoot with a deeper depth of field or a wider depth of field. Everything from the foreground to the background is nice and sharp in our image. Depth of field is affected by a few things: the focal length of your lens, the distance you are from your subject, and the aperture that you use. Primarily here we're talking about apertures and the effect it has on the depth of field of your image. Let's get some language sorted out here. Now, aperture and f-stop are the same thing. Just different countries, different parts of the world call it different things. So if you hear f-stop, we mean aperture. When I'm describing apertures, I like to use descriptive words, such as larger or smaller, because in my head I can see that a larger aperture will let more light in and open up my exposure more, create a lighter image. Whereas a smaller aperture will darken my image because it restricts the amount of light coming into my sensor. Talking about higher or lower apertures can be very confusing, particularly to beginner photographers. I shoot mostly people, and if I believe the experts, I should be shooting everything at large apertures to throw my foreground and my background out of focus, to separate my subject from the background. I don't think that's right. I don't want to do that all the time. I don't want all of my photographs to look the same. I've seen other photographers, and there are quite a lot of them, who shoot the same technique, everybody they shoot, and it's just the same image with a different face. Just a different beautiful girl this week than next week. I shoot mostly with flash, whether it's indoors or outdoors. The main reason I like to use flash is because I can control the light in a number of different ways. I can control the direction of the light, the intensity of the light, the color of the light. I can also alter my background exposure independently of my exposure on my subject. So it gives me so much to play with. You may not do that, but still, depth of field does make a difference in your images, whether you're shooting flash or natural light. When you're shooting natural light, there is a little bit more of an argument for limited depth of field, because you can't separate your subject from your background like I can. I can separate my subject with exposure, with color. I can darken my background down and make my subject brighter. When you're using natural light, it's not an easy thing to do. So sometimes using those large apertures with a limited depth of field can work reasonably well, but not all the time. I love showing detail in my background, as long as it doesn't detract from my main subject. Showing detail in my background gives a context to the image. It tells a story much more fully because we can see the environment that this image is taking place. The photographers that I admire the most are the ones who use their background to tell the story of their image. If I want an unrecognizable environment, I can just shoot against a plain background, shoot in the studio or up against a wall. It doesn't really add to the context of the image at all, but sometimes that's what we're looking for. I also love shooting with wide-angle lenses, as you can see here. The wide-angle lens has an inherent perception of a deeper depth of field, so the background tends to look a bit sharper when you're using wide-angle lenses, which suits me down to the ground. I want to be able to see that magnificent sky. I want to be able to see that sunset in detail. I want to be able to see the ocean and the waves in the background. as long as it doesn't detract from my main subject, and as long as it relates to my main subject. Now this takes a little bit of planning. Planning your background, your locations, which direction you're going to shoot, all of those things, it takes a little bit of time, a little bit of effort. If you can't be bothered, you don't want to think about it, just go out into the car park, turn your aperture up to 1.8 to throw that background out of focus and just shoot away. It's going to work okay, you're going to get nice shots, but you're not going to get the sort of images that I love. Now, a possible exception to this rule or this suggestion is when you can't control your backgrounds or your environment. If you're shooting weddings or you're shooting events, things that happen quickly, you need to catch images, you need to shoot a little bit candidly, then controlling your backgrounds is much more difficult. So it doesn't relate to everything. Now I shoot mostly flash. When I'm outdoors, I love shooting towards the sun because I love that sort of lighting. It just looks amazing to me. So if I'm shooting towards the sun, my background is pretty bright. I need to use a small aperture to expose my background correctly. So I'm usually on f16, f18, f20. So that gives me that beautiful background. If I'm not shooting towards the sun, I'm still shooting on bright days. I'm in Australia and we get sunshine just about all the time, not always. But that bright background means that I need a small aperture to expose it correctly, which is fine, it's what I want. I want that great depth of field. I want that small aperture because that's the effect that I love. I love having that depth in my images. When I'm shooting in the studio, the depth of field is a bit less of an issue. I still want to have sufficient depth of field to be able to have my subject completely sharp. I don't want a headshot with the closest eye sharp and the back eye blurry. I just don't like that effect. Personal opinion. I don't particularly like images where the eyes are sharp and the ears are blurry. I don't want that either. So I need to shoot maybe f5.6, f8, sometimes f11, depending on the situation, so that my whole subject is sharp and in focus. So I need that reasonable depth of field. So when I'm shooting on location, high-speed sync is really not much use to me. Neutral density filters aren't really going to help, and global shutters just aren't what I'm looking for. Those three things may help you in some situations, but most of the time it's with large aperture imaging. So I don't use that, so none of those things are really useful to me. I'm going to produce a few videos in the future that explain the reasons why those three elements aren't really useful to me, so keep an eye out for that. So every situation is different. You may have your own preferences, as I do, but it's up to you what you do. Now look at a few of these images and the situations that they're shot in. These images don't need a great depth of field because the image is pretty much two-dimensional. The background is very close to the subject, so I don't need a really small aperture to give me that in-focus background. If I'm shooting in natural light and the light's pretty flat, I can use that minimal depth of field to concentrate attention on those faces. The background, the foreground is out of focus. The viewer's eye naturally goes to the sharpest part of the picture, so it can help me out in that way because I don't have the option of separating my subject with light, with colour, with contrast. I love creating depth, like this image. It gives me a feeling of three-dimensionality in my image. It helps me to show what's in the background, what's in the foreground, if there was a foreground there. It allows me to tell a story much more fully and gives an environment that that subject, that person, can exist in. I can create drama with images like this. Having this spectacular background just creates the drama in the image. It doesn't take over from the main subject because I can separate them with light, but having that background there just adds that extra bit of wow to the image. I can create images that ask questions. The viewer looks at the image and thinks, well, why is that person there? What are they doing? Have they been doing something, or are they about to do something? What sort of environment do they exist in? All of those things are great because it allows the viewer to interact a bit more with the image and to either create a story themselves or look at the story that I'm trying to create and hopefully understand what I'm doing. When I'm shooting at night, often I want those point light sources in the background to show up. I don't necessarily want them to be huge bokeh balls of light. When I'm using intentional camera movement, I want those sharp highlights in the background to give me those electric sort of lines when I do my camera shake, to make it a bit more exciting and to make it a bit more impactful. Basic things like shooting bubbles in the studio or on location. I need to get that depth of field working here because there's probably about 2 or 3 meters of depth of field between the front bubble and the back bubble with my subject in the middle. I don't particularly want those front bubbles to be out of focus because it's a distraction. It doesn't work. I need to get those bubbles in relatively sharp focus, so my depth of field does that for me. Face shots, as I said before, I want to have that whole face in sharp focus. I want enough depth of field to be able to give that focus right from the tip of their nose right through to the back of their head and down to their shoulders as well. I don't really want to have out of focus parts of my image unless that's my intention. I have been experimenting lately with partial out of focus images, both landscapes, still lifes and portraits. So you'll see something in the future about that. Sunbeams and skies, sunsets, sunrises, all of those things I want to be able to show you in the image. I'm there at a specific day, at a specific time to show these things, to be able to show you this background, this spectacular sky, this beautiful sunrise and sunset. I could throw it all out of focus and have it just all blurry with a few colours, but I don't think it gives the same effect. So, be yourself. Don't follow the crowd. Do whatever you want to do to produce the images that you're after. Use small apertures. Use slow shutter speeds. Use high ISO. It's all up to you. All of these controls are there for us to use and to be creative with. Now to finish off, I should say, I should have a little ticker across the bottom, a little thing that says, I'm not perfect. I don't always do this stuff perfectly. And I know that I'll get a lot of comments in the comments section about how useless I am and how stupid I am and how this stuff doesn't work for everybody. Doesn't bother me. It works for me. I can just tell you what I think. I can tell you what my opinions are. I can tell you what my preferences are. It's up to you to take it or leave it, but try out this stuff because if you don't, you're never going to progress as a photographer. You need to try new stuff. You need to experiment. You need to think outside the square. Do that and you'll be a much better photographer.